morning, Grant here. Uh, this morning I want to talk about socialism. I think that we've seen a ton of a just deluge of rhetoric against socialism in politics. And I think it's really, really important to define what socialism and social practices actually is and how you separate that from communism and how you separate that from like living in in an actual commune. Um, so what the political discussion has come to take socialism and try to conflate it with communism, and then conflate communism with a fear that you will not be able to own anything anymore. And that was the idea, this the whole thing behind the Red Scare and why we were so galvanized as a country to invade Vietnam and Korea because we were afraid that communism was going to spread. And somehow logic goes, yes, it's first step Korea, next step Idaho. I don't it's kind of like, oh, it's going to spread to Asia, and then everybody's going to be like, the capitalism is just going to fall out of fashion, and it's threatening to, as if whatever. New ideas are dangerous to oppressive governments that aren't doing anything. And so if you aren't actually solving problems, people are only going to put up with that for so long before a new idea of how we could do something comes in. And that is going to resonate with a certain amount of people. And so what America was afraid of was that a certain amount of people were going to sympathize with the communist ideals, and then they were going to gain more and more political power and eventually subvert democracy. If only we had a real-life example of a political party doing that with, some sort of ideal. I don't know. Hard to imagine. But anyway, that was their concern. And the idea at the time was that, communists don't let you own anything. Everything is owned by the state. Your home is owned by the state. You get a meager amount of wages, then everybody gets paid the same, and there's everybody gets equal stuff, but everybody's experience is equally awful, is kind of how it goes. And part of that is because you look at what happened in Russia when it became the Soviet Union, and you look at what happened in China when the original Mao's People's Revolution, and you see things like long bread lines and inconvenient stuff, and because they made really big mistakes in how the state can run things, because there's a certain logic to having a free market economy. And if you are Russia and you say, oh, well, we don't have a need for this many cars, but I need to employ this many people, so let's make more cars than we need, and let's do it in such a way where we don't really need any quality testing because I'm the quality testing board, so make whatever you want. And so it's a weird method for creating an economic forces, in that you don't have any checks and balances in the free market, and you also don't have any checks and balances with government regulation held accountable to a individual, like a free press, because you don't have a free press. And so what you do is you get into an echo chamber when you build stuff, and then you account for individual greed and people's natural instinct to separate themselves into different castes. And what you end up with is a dictatorship. There's a political party. The party has a leader. The party leader is the de facto dictator of your communist organization. And that, I guess, is scary to Americans who don't understand politics and etc. It should be scary to Americans, not because they're going to take everything away, but because it is a model that doesn't fucking work. I always like to say communism looks great on paper, and once you actually put in the real flaws and the things that Karl Marx didn't think of, it starts to break down pretty quickly. Socialism is completely different. Socialism is this idea that I think it synergizes really, really well with the human more coffee inside me, please. socialism synergizes really well with this human need for community, to have a little collective, whether that is your family, whether that is your tribe, whether that is your township or your city, etc., or in some cases your state or your country. That's your collective. And humans naturally are going to form those collectives of various sizes. You're going to find like religious beliefs, like spiritual beliefs, like interests and practices, etc., like ideals when it comes to what should we build and what should we focus on and what do we value. It's going to coalesce around those different communities. It's what do we value teaching our children. And socialism is taking the fruits of your labor, the actual capital that every individual in the collective is generating, putting it together and using a collective model to get the most out of that labor. So instead of, and I like to use this example because I think food makes socialism make sense in some ways. So in one way, if you are, let's say you wanted a sandwich, right? And you go to the grocery store and you're going, I'm going to buy everything at the grocery store to make a sandwich. And as we know, the grocery store is not conducive for one person making one sandwich. You are going, and like if I want a tomato, I want a slice of tomato on my sandwich. Well, I can't just buy a slice of tomato. I have to get a whole tomato. I want it between two pieces of bread. Well, I can't just buy 2 pieces of bread. I have to buy a loaf of bread. I want a little bit of mayonnaise on there. Okay, well, you can't just get a swipe of mayonnaise. You have to buy a jar of mayonnaise, etc. and so forth. So you end up with, let's say I go to the store and I'm like, man, I just really want to make myself a decent BLT. I get everything I want for BLT, and what I end up with is I have paid for the materials to make 30 sandwiches so that I can have my one sandwich. And if everybody in my community also thought that way and they said, okay, well, I also want a sandwich, so they go to the grocery store and they buy all the individual ingredients to buy that one sandwich, and they end up with the materials at home to make 30 sandwiches. All of a sudden we have this huge wasteful amount of resources, right? Technically, the person who wanted a sandwich got a sandwich, but there's all this food waste going on. So socialism is this idea that if we got 30 people together and they all pitched in equal amounts for all the materials to make that one sandwich, so now the cost collectively for each person is 1/30 of what the individual person was spending, and everybody gets one sandwich out of it, that's socialism. Socialism is the smart, using your resources in a smart way to get the most out. And so when we say, oh, we could do socialized medicine or socialized childcare, that's what it is. It's everybody pitches a little bit in, but everybody gets the full benefit out. So instead of one person having cancer and chemo treatments, and it costs $70, $80, $100,000 in chemo costs that are being paid by a health insurance company, that are then passing those costs on to all the people who are the members of that health insurance, who are then passing those costs on to companies who are using that as an excuse to keep workers engaged, even if they don't have other good take-home pay or other scenarios that incentivize them to work, basically locking the modes of labor in place. Instead of doing all that with all that wasted money, you could just get rid of health insurance completely, pay a little bit of money out of your paycheck, a fraction of what you're paying, because you wouldn't have to support an entire health insurance company. If you said, if that was the, so you could do that, and then you could all pay a little bit, a tiny fraction of what previous would be every year, and get full healthcare coverage out of it. That is possible. And it's not an impossibility, it is a reality. It's where you go, well, that would never work. It's like, I can now point to 24 countries in the world where that does work. where people figured that out. Because when it comes to problem solving and it comes to efficiency modeling, that is the logical conclusion of going, okay, we have made too many sandwiches. We are paying too much. I have all this waste. I have resources that we could be using to pool together, and we could do that and find that sweet spot where it's like, okay, if I have 40 people and I only have the stuff to make 30 sandwiches and I buy double, now I have the stuff to make 60 sandwiches, and it doesn't quite work out. But if you scale those things up, then all of a sudden we have more and more resources for the community with less investment than the individual would have to do. And that is the greatest trick that conservative politics and capitalism has been able to pull off, is convincing people that they are somehow better off by themselves, paying for things individually, than they are in a collective, contributing to the collective. And that somehow that contributing to the collective and getting the fruits of your labor back in an investment scenario is somehow hurting billionaires. Or, well, it will. It's somehow hurting you and not billionaires. That to me is an insane thing, because when you see how socialism works, and it's the same idea. It's you rinse and repeat. It's that you have already done the labor. You have already paid for these services. That's why we have government. We get into this. The argument is that, let's say we have an Old West. I'm from Omaha, right? Heart of the Old West, the start of the rush into the Homestead Act, the breaking off point where everybody's outfitting and they're running out across the Great Plains and into Colorado for the gold rush and everything. A lot of little towns pop up, and those little towns start with being in territories. They don't start with a whole lot of laws. They don't start with a whole lot of regulation. And so if you take this model of a bunch of people who've said, oh, this valley, it's nice, we should settle here, whatever it is. We've got a source of fresh water. We seem to have shade. There's decent weather. We've got transportation. If we want to head back down that road, we know that civilization is that way. We can potentially run the railroad. Like, this seems like a pretty good place to set up shop. And it doesn't take you very long when you start adding more people. It's interesting because there's like this thing where if you're small, if your collective is small, like family sized, and I'm not talking like, husband and wife family sized, but still that's kind of implied, but I'm talking like the old West family size where it's like, we got 8 kids. You do that and you have like 1 or 2 families, or you scale it. There's like a middle ground where it doesn't inherently, people get a little defensive. I don't know why. But the idea, if we look at like books and libraries, that's why we have libraries. The idea being like, okay, well, I bought this book and I want to physically have it and read it. And once I physically had it and read it, I have really no use for that book anymore. I mean, I can pick it up and read it again. I can reference things in it if it's like a textbook or something that I want to review. But for the most part, once you've ingested the content of the book, it's not as valuable to you as it would be to somebody who hasn't read it. And it will just sit on your shelf as a little trophy, a little memento. It becomes a physical totem of you remembering that you read the thing. And it makes sense that if you're within your collective, even if we go with the family model, you then share that book with somebody else. So you need 1 copy of the book. You don't need 8 copies of the book, 1 for each child, to read. They just have to share. They have to take turns. And sharing a little bit is part of that. It's like, oh, here's a resource that we don't use all the time. We can put that in a library. And you see libraries that don't just rent books. The library is a fantastic model for socialist policies, in that there are things that are expensive, that are cost prohibitive to buy yourself, that you do not use all the time, that you could share with the community, and then you scale it up based on population and need. One of those very interesting things that I've seen public libraries rent out are cake pans. Custom cake pans for parties. Like my 4th birthday party, I had a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles cake that my mom made. And she had a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles cake pan, and she made the cake, she turned it out, and then you just frost it with the different colors, and it looks really cool. And it's that kind of a cake pan where you're like, how often, A, There isn't a specific day where you need a custom cake pan. It's mostly birthdays and special occasions. And so you're not going to have a run on custom cake pans. Nobody's dying because they can't get the right custom cake pan that they want. But at the same time, it stops them from having to go out into the world and buy a $30 cake pan that they're going to use once. And it's a brilliant idea to add richness and nuance to people's lives without forcing everyone to make their own sandwich. So that's socialism. And then we think of this with billionaires. Billionaires exist for two reasons. One, because we as a society figured out a way to sell digital copies of things. So if you are thinking about this in terms of the economic trail that goes down, right? So even not that long ago, video games adhered somewhat to this model, right? And when I was growing up, a video game was something that you got in a box. It had, I mean, it was like a cereal box, right? You wanted it to feel sturdy. It had art all over inside was a CD or multiple CDs if you were really, in for some good times. And then it had, like a CD insert in it that had artwork in it. Sometimes there was a book that came with it that explained how to play the game and explained some other stuff. Sometimes they'd put other little collectible, things or ads for other games that they had in there, etc. And it would be on a shelf in a store and you would go buy it. And I still have, I'm turning around expecting, I have them in all boxed up from the move. So I have all my original boxes. I have the original Maxis Sim Tower and Sim Copter boxes with the CD cases and all the CDs and stuff. And if we think about that as an economic model, yes, the game developers spent a certain amount of resources on the development. There's the labor to make the product, right? But then they also, and arguably the labor to make the product or create the idea to make the product is always in any product, right? It's just how are we, video games I think are on the high end, video games and movies, high end on the labor to make it, right? There's less labor arguably to make a breakfast sandwich than there is to make a video game. But still, it's a point in the line. So if we're thinking about that, the labor to make the product, the game developers invested their time and their creative efforts, but they also, they paid creative people to collaborate on the game. They paid musicians, they paid artists, they had their little game development team that got money out of it. But then they also had to physically make copies of the game. So they had to send that to a company that burnt all the game files onto a CD. They had to print the labels, they had to put the CDs in the cases, they had to put them in the boxes. The boxes had to go into a case, the case had to go into a pallet, the pallet had to go onto a truck or a plane, and that had to be shipped across the country to stores where they were physically stocked on the shelves, where a low-level retail employee put them on the shelf and got it up to the register and rang people out, etc. Every single point in that chain, people made money off of. The shipping, the retail employees, the store, the guy printing the labels up, the CD maker, everything in between where you get that product to market. Boom! It allows people to make money and it stimulates the economy. And what we did is we basically said, well, fuck all that. I don't want to have I don't need to hedge my bets and say, well, how many copies of CDs do I need to make? Do I expect to sell 10,000 copies of this game? All right, let's print 12 of them just in case, but we might end up with a bunch of copies that go unsold, and then we're going to have to try to move them. It's like, no. We're going to just put this online for sale digitally, and people can just purchase it directly from us or through something like Steam, or now, Epic or Game Pass or whatever you have, and that money goes directly to the people that do it. And the difference between them selling one game and the difference between them selling 1 million games as far as cost, how much it costs to sell that, is negligible. I mean, there is some cost in server space to send the download out, which is, again, I'm talking cents. It costs a fraction. As somebody who is, embedded in Amazon Web Services and trying to fit and knows how much it costs to pull a gig out of that system, it is cents. It may cost the company maybe a fractions of a penny to actually send the game files across the internet to you. And for that, they're like, what if we charged $100? And so it doesn't matter how many of these digital copies that they make. And at the same time, even if you're not storing that on a server, if people are sharing things back and forth, it costs them fucking nothing. So we've developed this idea that we can then generate economic value out of nothing. And when you generate economic value out of nothing, all of a sudden, the people at the top get to continue to print more money, but there isn't anything that's coming down. So unless those people are actively incentivized to reinvest in the community, then they are taking more and more of the fruits of the labor and not actually providing or reinvesting anything. That's where government comes in. Government comes in and says, okay, well, we are generating, as a country, we're generating a certain amount of GDP, we're generating a certain amount of wealth. Everybody should be contributing a set percentage of that into the collective. And the billionaires go, well, but if you do the math, I'd be paying 100 times more than the average person, and I would still only get the same out of it. That doesn't make sense to my capitalist brain. And we're like, no, you're making 100 times more because you have absorbed the labor of 100,000 people and you haven't given anything back. Every billionaire that exists because they have profited off of every hour of labor from every single person underneath them. That's how you make money. They basically have said, your labor is worth X to me, but it makes me this much money. So every single hour that somebody works makes money. They're not being paid fully. They're not being paid at cost of what they actually make the company. And so all of that, at every level of the company, somebody is working, and they are, hopefully, if they are organized an organization correctly, then they are making a profit on the labor that they're doing. Whether that's the retail employee who is ringing people out and they are bringing in the sales, whether that is the engineers who are building the products, whether that's the legal department who is preventing lawsuits and trying to do risk management, or, et cetera, defending the patents and the things that you have. Every single person in there is not being paid fully what they make the company. All of that starts to just trickle up. And then we introduce this idea of shareholders and owning pieces of it, and it makes zero fucking sense to me that you would go, okay, we've made this model that's very successful. We have this corporate collective where we all work together really well, and we work for a common goal, and we have done it in such a way where we've min-maxed our labor, and we have made it profitable. We have a surplus of labor. We have a surplus of resources. And if that company was a living collective, was a city, you would then go, oh, this is great. We have all of these resources now to provide people health care and public parks and free childcare and affordable public transportation, and we could do XYZ with all that. But instead they go, you know what we need to do? We need to take that and we need to give it to the shareholders who believed in us from the beginning. The shareholders who own a piece of the company, they deserve the fruits of all of our labor, and then that just starts to rack up wealth at the top. So if you're a worker at any level other than the fucking chairman of the board, you are being taken advantage of. And the idea that the government, this is where the government should step in. The government should step in and go, hey, no, you are basically milking the labor of our populace to take advantage of that to generate wealth for yourself, and you're not reinvesting it. You're not giving anything back. The idea that the amount of impact that buying a $500 million yacht has versus the impact of investing $500 million into parks or public schools is astonishingly different. And this is where my gripe is, that billionaires have decided that they are going to try to buy things that aren't for sale. You get to a point where it's like, oh, the scale of wealth is, I can't afford anything. Been there? I've been there. Where you're like, I don't know where my next meal's coming from. I am going to, And then as you go up, it's like, and then there's like the living paycheck to paycheck, where you are working your fucking ass off, and every piece of the money that you have is accounted for, and you get to the end of the month and you're like, okay, it is peanut butter and jelly again. It is ramen noodles. It is, I can't afford to do this. I can't afford to do that. So that when you get a windfall of something, you're just like, oh, you know what? I would love to just get my head above water for a moment. And then there's this level above that where you start to get comfortable. And as a millennial, that notion of where you start to get comfortable, where you're like, oh, I might be able to put something in savings, my stress level might go down, is anxiety inducing for me, because every single time we've seen that as a society, the legs have been pulled out from under us in some way. There's always some fucking thing. It's either COVID, or it's 9/11, or it's the 2008 financial crisis, or it's the 2015 financial crisis, it's the housing bubble, it's the, you name it. If millennials are about to have financial security or like reasonable housing prices, something is going to come along to pull the rug out from under us. But there's that, and that's still like a, you can pay your bills, and you can afford minor luxuries. I'm saying, like, you could go out to the movies, you can buy presents for people, you can have a nice meal at a restaurant, but you're not financially secure in that, like, if you got hit by a bus, you would be bankrupted, right? If something big happened, there's no insulation from that. And people would argue that that's where insurance comes in, and it's a whole other thing. I don't want to get off on insurance, but and then above that is where you're making enough money where you're like, oh, not only am I comfortable, but I'm able to put things into savings, and I'm able to afford larger luxuries like big trips, new cars, etc., and so forth. And then above that, this is all right there, we're still in lower class. Okay? So if you think, oh, I can afford a car and I can go on a big trip, that's still lower class. The middle class that we've developed, if we're taking this gradient from billionaires who can buy $500 million yachts to people who cannot afford food, the gradient of that, the middle class, are people who make over $1 million a year. If you don't make over $1 million a year, you are not in the middle class. And that's insane to me that we allowed that to happen. That you are closer to bankruptcy and poverty than you are to that billionaire at any given moment, always. And even then, somebody who has $1 million is closer to bankruptcy and poverty than somebody who has $1 billion. And if we go up that tier again, it's like, okay, million to 20 million or 5 million. And now you're going, okay, now I have more money than I could possibly spend on myself in a lifetime for my reasonable needs. So that's where you start getting into luxury goods and services, to investments, to charitable donations, to owning multiple pieces of property. And that's where you see a lot of people who start having all the toys. That's where they go, oh, we'll go to the cabin, we'll go up to the lake, and we'll play with the toys. And the toys are large pieces of recreational equipment that cost $10,000 to $15,000 a piece. The toys are the motorcycle collection. They're the set of ski-doos. They're the snowmobiles. They're the RV with all the dirt bikes on the back of it. They're that is a level of, and some people for that's their retirement and that's how they choose to spend their money. But that's insane to somebody who is literally worried about the end of the month and overdrafting their bank account and is really tired of peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. That somebody else is going, you know what, I think the best use of my money is to, and again, that's the idea. We're coming back to socialism again. The idea is not to take away those things. The idea is to get people to think differently about how much they use them. And so the idea being, could you do a library thing? I mean, arguably, jet skis are fucking dangerous, as are four-wheelers and dirt bikes. Like, there's more chance that you're going to hurt yourself the more people that use them than not. But they're also fun, But the idea is, like, could you have a library thing where you do the same thing with those, right? How often are you actually using your jet skis versus how much they sit there? And how much would it be where you could buy the toys and play with them and have a decent time? And it's all about sharing. So the idea isn't that we're going to come and be like, oh, we're going to take your second house and we're going to give it to people. It's like, no, you have generated a certain amount of wealth, and we want to put that into the collective to benefit everyone, so that everyone has a social safety net where they don't feel like they're going to just like be homeless and cast to the side, where they have their healthcare taken care of, their mental health taken care of. And those two things alone are the foundations for reinvesting in society. Billionaires are afraid of that because I think they're constantly doing that math of feeling that they're going to be found out. That they sit at the top of this pyramid of wealth and look at all the things that they've achieved and go, how do they not, there's so many people in the world, how do they not just claw their way up to the top of the pyramid, tear me to pieces, literally eat me, and take all this for themselves? Why don't they do that? Then somehow take away from that fear and paranoia the idea that they need to make more wealth and isolate themselves even more and disenfranchise people to prevent anybody from... It's like they got the wrong message out of it. It's instead of going, oh, you know what I should do? It's like, it would be like, it'd be like Ebenezer Scrooge getting the three ghosts in A Christmas Carol. And he goes through the three ghosts and they're like, Ebenezer Scrooge, here's the ghost of Christmas past. And he's like, wow, look, I was happy and youthful and I was full of dreams and I appreciated things. Here's the ghost of Christmas present. He's like, here's you being a dick. And here's the ghost of Christmas future. Here's your grave. And they go, oh my God, I need to build a ghost gun to defend myself against ghosts because these ghosts made me feel awful. It's like, you were so close. You were so close to it. You could have just said, hey, what if I donated my wealth to make people feel good so that they feel like I'm a force for good in the world and not for evil, so that you aren't anxious about what's going on. And instead they decided to go, what if we double down on conservative politics and we hamstring socialist policies and we invest money against their political campaigns and we channel all of our wealth and money into rampant late stage capitalism, and we glorify billionaires and we hold them up, and we just try to really galvanize ourselves into this position so that what we've achieved can never be taken away. And so you can give yourself just a big old pat on the back that you're the quote unquote richest dude in the planet. And then I would question that. It's like, what? Okay, neato. I think if you happen to have the title of richest person on the planet, you now have a huge onus on you, a responsibility to not be that person by reinvesting as much of your wealth as you can. That's what we should do, is we should just go, okay, cool. Or maybe we put a ticking clock on it. I think it'd be like, okay, cool. You are currently the richest person in the world. We represent a group of people that will hunt you down to the ends of the earth and murder you in 2 years if you are still the richest person in the world. That's it. You got 2 years to be richest. And if you do not reinvest your wealth and give that away and help your community, then we will make sure that your estate, whoever inherits your wealth, gets that fucking message. And then you do it, and then that person gives their wealth away, ideally, and it goes to the next richest person, and the same people knock on their door and just go, hi, we're starting the 2-year timer, just letting you know. And they go, what? And they're like, yep, you're the richest person in the world, so congrats on that. Have fun, but also, if you buy yourself a fucking yacht, we'll know that it's still part of your net wealth, and that doesn't count. So you have to actually invest it in things that you don't control or benefit you directly. Have a good time. Have a fun 2 years. See ya. And they go, what? And then they, ideally, and we just keep doing it. It'd be kind of a fun little short story to write, like a little Black Mirror-y sort of thing about the secret society that shows up at your fucking door. Be like, congrats. There's your gold star for being richest person in the world. That's the way it should work anyway. And we are at 34 minutes. I wanted these to be closer to half an hour, but that's socialism. So the argument that socialism is bad is insane to me, because socialism is always going to benefit the collective. And when they say, "Oh, well, that's like, but I'm a farmer and I'm in the middle of no place and I do things myself and no one's helping me out," and it's like, well, really? Really, on paper, no one is helping you out. You don't get any farm subsidies. You have no farm co-op. You don't pay any taxes into having, I don't know, power delivered to your house. You don't pay any utilities. You do every your whole thing is completely self-sustainable, and you have no farmers insurance. You have nothing. It's like, yes, insurance is kind of a form of socialism, but it is, I don't want to get it, I'll do another half an hour rant on insurance. Insurance is gambling that you are going to fuck up. And insurance is gambling against the people who are responsible and aren't going to fuck up. And it's also they're banking that, they're scaring people into paying money. And if you get people into this idea that goes, hey, all these terrible things can happen to you. I'm an insurance salesman. Imagine this happening to your house. Imagine that happening to your house. Put yourself in a fear and anxiety-induced state and ask yourself what you're going to do when this happens. And the reality is like, oh yeah, if my community got demolished by a tornado, ideally what we would do without insurance is we would come together, we would pool our resources, we would help each other rebuild the community. With insurance, they have to basically bait you into thinking that you're, at any moment, any storm, at any time, could demolish your house, and that they will pay to rebuild it as long as you pay X amount of money every month. And the more people they convince to do that, to pay money when their house hasn't been demolished, the more money the insurance company makes. And the problem, that on its face wouldn't be a problem, except for the fact that they have people that they pay to argue not to pay and rebuild your house. That's the part I have problems with, is where I then have to argue with a claims adjuster and they go, oh, you're trying to defraud our company out of money to rebuild your house that was destroyed by a tornado, or we're going to value your house lower, or we're not going to believe you that you had all this stuff in it, or we're not going to, and what you've done is you basically said, okay, you guys are just miserable, and I don't want insurance, I don't want anything, I don't think it should be a thing that people are allowed to buy, or if it is, it has to be well regulated. And at the same time, people are going to try to take advantage of it if they think they can get above it. Insurance fraud, they think that that's their money and they want it back. It's not like a savings account. You would actually have more luck throwing money into a collective savings and like disaster fund than you would. But even then, that has to be public or publicly because somebody inevitably is going to see a large group, bunch of money there and go, I could benefit myself. So there's certain things with corruption that you have to weed out, and that's where oversight comes into play, and that's where more eyes are better than less, right? Where there's the evil is done in secrecy, and inevitably when you have people who are, like the comptroller of what's that town in Illinois where the lady bought her own horse, like racehorse horses, and embezzled $60-something million out of the small town. You need oversight and scrutiny in things like that, and that's what socialism is also about. It's like to make sure that not only are we all paying in, but we're all getting equal things out. And that's crazy to me, is that I am paying my taxes already. Like, you're getting tax money, and the agreement that we had was that you would give us social policies that benefit everyone. And then I get politicians who go, oh, yeah, no. We're not going to change your property value taxes. We're actually going to continue to put money into the state. We're just not going to pay for things that benefit everyone. We're not going to pay for public education. We're not going to pay for libraries anymore. We're not going to pay for your woke bullshit of like, why would we pay for healthcare and childcare and all of these mental health? Why would we pay for healthcare for veterans? And you're like, that's the fucking point. That's why I'm paying them. That's why we're all paying them. That's why we agree to pay for them, is because we realize that it is cheaper for us to pay a small percentage in our taxes than for me to individually build a public school system and fund it myself. And then the exchange is that my kids get to go have an education and I don't have to individually pay for it. I don't have to buy my own sandwich. And what we're doing is we're saying, you all now, the only option you have is to purchase all of the materials to build your own sandwiches. You don't have the ability to collaborate at all. And the one person who's laughing all the way to the bank is the guy who sells all the sandwich supplies, which he is then not reinvesting in the community at all. We are just throwing money up the ladder and not getting anything out of it. And we should stop doing that. We should really stop doing it. What an idea. Okay, 40 minutes. This is a long thing. Nobody's going to sit through a 40-minute video on socialism. Just me rambling. But maybe somebody will. All right. Until next time, take care.